Okay, I hope you understand that good in the title doesn't have a moral connotation but refers to opportunities. First, some background. Lex already told you a little bit, but I will give you a little more detail to get the taste of it. On September 1st, 2011, the Rector Magnificus of Tilburg University informed me confidentially that well-known social psychologist Diederik Stapel of our university had been identified as a data fraudster. Only 1 week earlier, Stapel had confessed to the rector after he had been exposed by 3 whistleblowers. And it was immediately clear then that the magnitude and the implications of the fraud were very serious. I've written down 2 points to make that clear to you. For example, it was clear right away that the fraud went back at least 15 years. So it started 15 years at least previously, covering periods at the University of Amsterdam, where he was affiliated in the 1990s, University of Groningen, and Tilburg University. And the second point to illustrate how serious this problem was, that it was clear right away from his confession, so to speak, that it involved dozens of articles and book chapters and affected very seriously several PhD theses. Well, what was my involvement? Lex already gave it away a little bit. In 2011, Stapel was the Dean of the School of Social and Behavioral Sciences, where I also was affiliated, and I was Vice Dean. And we were both appointed in September 2010, so 1 year previously. Well, I'm a professor of methodology and statistics. I hardly knew Stapel before I became Vice Dean because he was active in a field totally different from mine. And obviously I was completely unaware of his misconduct until the rector informed me, and I have to say it was quite a shock. Well, being Vice Dean, the rector asked me to step in as interim dean. He gave me about 2 minutes to make up my mind. And well, that was enough for me. That was 6 years ago. I decided to become interim dean, well, because what else could you do at that moment? That is 6 years ago now. I will resign as dean September 1st of this year. And I'm happy to say that, well, I'm happy with my 2 career changes, 6 years ago and also the one that's coming. Well, before we, and with we, I mean Tilburg University, went public with this problem, we did 2 things. First, we asked Diederik Stapel for a formal confession so that his contract could be terminated. And we were very lucky because he made a confession in the presence of his lawyer and also the lawyer that represented the university. And that was enough to terminate his contract. So we were lucky, actually. You hear and read an awful lot about scandals like this taking place in other universities, and then administrators are often criticized for not kicking someone in the street right away. Well, in the Netherlands, you really need a confession, so you have to be lucky. You really have to be lucky. And the second thing we did is we installed a committee by university regulations to formally investigate the fraud cases. For each publication, it had to be investigated, secured, whether it was based on falsified or fabricated data or whether the results were completely made up. And the second thing was that this was deemed necessary to inform colleagues and the public, of course, about what was trustworthy and what not, to protect co-authors from being falsely accused of involvement, and to safeguard former and present PhD students from their early careers being devastated. At Tilburg University, a committee was appointed, chaired by Willem Leeveld. Willem Leeveld is a former president of the Royal Netherlands Academy of Arts and Sciences and was immediately ready, prepared to chair this committee. He was also an experimental psychologist in psycholinguistics, which was a lucky thing because Stapel also was an experimental psychologist in social psychology, and well, it helps, of course, if you know a little bit about the field. The formal mandate of the committee was the committee investigates which publications are based on feigned data or feigned research, and during which period the fraud has taken place. And second, the committee investigates the methods and circumstances. Actually, the phrasing used was research culture, possibly facilitating the breach, and provides recommendations for preventing repetition. At the University of Amsterdam, the Drent Committee was installed, and at the University of Groningen, the Noord Committee, and these committees received similar mandates. After 7 weeks already, the Leyveld Committee presented their preliminary conclusions, and I present three of them to you. The committee found that the fraud committed inflicted great harm to co-authors and PhD students in particular. The committee found that no one could be accused of culpable ignorance, meaning that no one knowingly cooperated in the fraud. People were misguided. And the committee presented a conclusion about the flawed performance of academic criticism that facilitated, according to the committee, unintendedly, the comprehensive and long-standing fraud. That is, nobody picked up the signs that were available during those years. I've written down 3 of them, and you can find all of this and many more details in the report that was published by the Drent, Noord and Leyveld committees. Well, there was an unusual way of working in isolation. Stapel had a habit of keeping colleagues who were nosy at a distance, but nobody asked questions that were, well, compelling enough. He did not allow PhD students to collect their own data. Now, young people don't know what is the usual way of working, so, well, they believe anything. But actually, in the surroundings of these people, nobody asked questions that were critical enough. And during the years, many unlikely results were presented to journals, seen by hundreds of reviewers, several editorial boards, and they were almost all top journals. Science, the most well-known, the best known, etc., etc. Okay, let's talk about interventions, because this is what the talk is mostly about, but this should bring you in the mood a little bit. Here is a selection of realized interventions at Tilburg University that we picked up from the recommendations from the preliminary report from October 2011 and the final report published a year later. Well, each PhD student today at Tilburg University has at least 2 supervisors. Before the scandal broke loose, it was also allowed that there was 1 supervisor. And, you know, this is still today not uncommon at many universities. We don't want that anymore. We've learned our lesson. Master theses and PhD theses are scanned for plagiarism. We did that already before Stapel. I included it in my talk to be complete. That's why I printed it in blue. So this was already in place. In the Netherlands, at promotion ceremonies, an official formula is read aloud publicly when the doctorate is awarded. And at many universities, and also at our university, the formula refers to the young doctor's obligation to academia and society to act with integrity. Our university has a code of conduct that everybody is supposed to know. The code of conduct already is in place for 10 or 15 years, but you're supposed to know what's in it and act accordingly. Every staff member must sign an integrity code. This is something of recent months, actually. And there is nowadays an independent integrity officer and a research committee that looks into alleged fraud allegations. The School of Social and Behavioral Science in particular has intensified classes on research ethics and research integrity. We did that already, but we intensified it. And now the most important thing, I think, of my talk, we've installed a science committee in the spring of 2012. And let's have a look at what that is. Okay. A science committee. What is it? What does it do and why? The name by itself says absolutely nothing, of course. What's a science committee? Actually, it's an audit committee. But 5 years ago, I didn't dare to call it an audit committee because, well, people were very much afraid, worried about their work being assessed. They didn't know what to expect, and so on and so on. But I thought we really had to do something like this. And so we installed our management team installed the so-called science committee. It's an audit committee that samples each year 20 out of the approximately 500 articles that are published by the school's researchers. And the committee assesses the quality of the data storage and the reporting of the research methods. The committee, once a year, advises the school's management team about what it did, what it found, and how it wants to continue. It also advises researchers about data storage, completeness of data sets, honoring subjects' privacy, access to data, and making data available to others, so publishing data. The aims of the committee are to provide a concerted effort to improve accountability for data handling and methods reporting, and to create an opportunity for all to learn. This is important to realize. This is not a committee that goes on a witch hunt. It's not a committee that's looking for crooks, but it's a committee that tries to improve data handling and advises researchers and also the management team of the school how to do that and how all to profit and learn from that experience. Furthermore, the committee contributes to the development of the university's data policy, and it contributes to the development of the Dutch national protocol, concerning data archiving by researchers in the social and behavioral sciences. Okay, a little bit more about this committee. You might ask yourself, why not set up a universal or a general data storage system first and a data management policy first for researchers to take advantage of before a committee audits their work? Aren't we working in the wrong order? Well, it was our thought that this would never work. This would never work because setting up a universal system is complex. It means that you have to program a very complex computer program. It's complex. It will present many unpleasant technical surprises, as any programming effort does. It takes a lot of time, usually 3 or 4 times as much as you plan in your most optimistic dreams, and it is expensive. And meanwhile, the sense of urgency would disappear. At least that was what we expected, especially because at that time many researchers weren't used to systematic data storage anyway. So we said to ourselves, let's turn this around. So we needed to make a flying start. We didn't want to wait, so we installed the science committee first. They set up their rules and regulations for researchers' data handling. They announced in our school that they would annually select 20 out of 500 articles that are published by our researchers. And now research groups were motivated to devise their own data policy that suited their needs best, so they could find their own tailor-made system. Of course, you don't want to stand empty-handed in front of the audit committee and look like a fool. So this was the way to get people working and to make them active. And actually, it worked quite well. It worked quite well up until the present day, but not perfectly, of course. So these may be interventions that work, but they don't work perfectly. Some groups, and I have to say this to their advantage, for example, the social psychologists, have their data policy better in place than others. So there are differences between groups. People tend to arrange, not everybody, but there are people who tend to arrange their data storage only when they are audited. Of course, this is not what you want. You want people to be, to work meticulously all the time and not when it's asked of them. And when people have left our school and go another place, they tend to lose commitment. So this is a sign that often people tend to consider these actions as, well, something they do for their employer, but not wholeheartedly, so to speak. Of course, there is no consistent data storage system, but this was a deliberate choice, giving priority to increasing awareness and accountability. And there remains much work to do, create greater awareness and a stronger sense of responsibility and accountability. Okay, as I said, this committee also contributes to other developments. For example, Tilburg University also has a policy in place with respect to data management, which simply entails the following. They want every school to install a data committee like we did. And the sense of urgency varies between schools, which shouldn't come as a surprise, I think. But they are catching up, slowly now and then, but they are all catching up, which is a good thing. And it would be great, of course, if the university would provide the means to develop this universal data storage system after all. There are also initiatives at the Dutch national level. The Assembly of Deans of the 14 schools of social and behavioral sciences in the Netherlands have installed a committee on science integrity, data storage and reproducibility. The committee aims at finding common ground for those 14 schools. It's a slow process, as you may imagine. There are huge differences in urgency and motivation, but there is consensus possible, we know now, on a list of basic issues. So at least we have a start. That's the good news. Well, as I already said, the data committee works quite well, but not perfectly, and this is true, I think, for all the initiatives taken. For example, let's take the last one. Schools differ with respect to requirements of data package and data management. Of course, between schools in one university and between universities, the sense of urgency varies. It really helps if you have had a scandal in your school, although I wouldn't recommend it. I mean, it's an experience you can miss. So we need time, patience, and perseverance to make everything work. Okay, conclusions. What may we expect from these interventions? Well, they won't prevent new scandals. They really won't. Extremists have their own reasons and they will work their way around the law. That's what you see everywhere in society. So don't be optimistic about this. However, the interventions, I believe, will create a higher level of awareness and set clearer behavior standards, encourage, in other words, responsible conduct of research. And this is important. And I think as a side effect, they might even reduce questionable research practices. Of course, you're familiar with questionable research practices, not reporting undesirable results, leaving out unfavorable data, and so on and so on. Often not inspired by bad intentions, although you never know for sure, but surely producing bad outcomes. So we want to get rid of questionable research practices, of course. What did we learn from the Stapel fraud affair? Well, of course, people were shocked at our school by the seriousness of the deceit, and actually this spread around the country and also internationally. And that it happened at their school, their university, their country. They felt ashamed. It also appealed to feelings of discomfort, I believe, already present but obscured. These feelings were not talked about a lot 6-7 years ago. And the Stapel affair served as a catalyst, I believe. The discomfort actually referred to the economic principle that ruled research, and perhaps still does. And that principle says, the more the better. Having more articles is good. Giving more lectures is good. Supervising more PhD theses is good. Acquiring more grants, winning more prizes, etc., etc. And in itself, there's nothing wrong with that, of course. It gives you more status, it helps you make a career, it provides you more traveling opportunities, you can meet more important people, and so on and so on. What I see nowadays is a grown consciousness of these problems, and in particular I see researchers and administrators struggling, not with each other, but with the problem, struggling to find a new balance between performance pressure, because what we're doing is top sports, of course. Good research is top sports, and responsible conduct of research. And there is a huge tension between the two that we should not neglect, not ignore. I had a personal note in the end, but I will skip that. I think, well, let's forget about what I think. I already said enough. Thank you for your attention.
Well, thank you very much for this wonderfully clear and timed presentation. Thanks a lot. We do have time for a few questions. Please line up for the microphone, state your name and your question. And please don't try to give your own lecture.
Okay. Dr. Letellier from France Ethical Committee. You mentioned that there were many students who used established the information for their PhD. What happened to this student? What happened to their PhD, which was completely false?
Okay, well, the only thing I want to say about that is what is in the report by the committees, because I'm not going to disclose personal information, of course, but it is, the PhD students were allowed to keep their title, so they are still doctor, they still have that title. And I can only speak from the PhD students from Tilburg University. I think 4 out of the 11 PhD students whose work was contaminated came from Tilburg University and had their promotion there. And I think after having a difficult time, they all landed on their feet again. So, and that's what I want to say about it, and no more. Okay.
If there are no other questions, I've got an opportunity myself,
Okay.
Klaas. Behavioral change is always a story about carrots and sticks.
Yeah.
What was your important carrot and what was your most important stick?
Oh, that's a difficult question. I think, well, let me put it this way. It was an immensely complex discussion at our school, because, well, people did not only reason rationally about this, but were also very emotional. And what they saw before them was the end of an era, so to speak. Loss of academic freedom, for example. I mean, people were really afraid that, well, bad things were going to happen. I have to say, most people, most researchers in our school were very quickly convinced that we had to set an example. So I wasn't the only person who said that. Many people, the majority actually, was convinced that we had to set an example. And this also gave us a great opportunity to do it. I mean, we had all the attention directed to us. And, well, as I said, never waste a good crisis. So this is all, we also realized, you know, it's not only disaster, it's also an opportunity to do things right. And to get things in place that you would otherwise never get in place. And so that's actually what we did. That was the atmosphere, and I think it worked out fine.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you very much for this presentation again. Thank you well.